This is Humans of Non-League, a podcast about the people who live and love football outside the spotlight. My name is Chris Nee, and this week's Human is a media machine with writing credits and some massive international titles, as well as coverage for a club closer to home. Rob Hemingway is a multilingual NCTJ accredited journalist and a scout with FA Talent ID qualifications. He's also an advocate for the non-league game and involved on multiple fronts. So let's get stuck in. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hi Chris, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Lovely to speak to you again. I'm going to go straight to the beginning. I think it's going to become a bit of a habit for me because I'm desperate to kind of get a proper understanding of the people who actually make the game happen. And that, to me, starts with a love of football in childhood and maybe before football in childhood. So I always like to start at the beginning. So let's do that. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Tunbridge in Kent, that well-known behemoth of football heartland. Funnily enough, now home to Tunbridge Angels, who are quite a well-known non-league club, but not quite in the same league as the club I currently cover. So it was. I did used to hear shouts from their ground at home, but not a ground I frequented enormously. But my football love certainly did begin from young.
I think Tunbridge Angels so far are the most mentioned club not connected to any of the people who I've spoken to. It's come up quite a lot already, yeah. Did you play football as a kid?
I did, yeah. I actually started off with the Cubs as my very first team. And I think the only reason I joined was because I knew they had a football team, and for whatever reason there was, requirements that you had to be a member to take part. So that was aside from sort of playground kickabouts, I think that was my first experience of organised football.
So that would be Saturday mornings, was it, where you were?
I think so, yeah. And then it quickly migrated into sort of bigger teams around the town, and obviously going to primary school and secondary school, sort of going up through club and school and whatnot. But yeah, you never sort of forget those first moments, which were definitely some of the most enjoyable.
What position were you playing in those days?
I was mainly up front, but I had some terrible droughts along the way. And I think I just migrated back, really. I used to, by the end, I think I stopped playing competitive football sort of maybe 13, 14, something like that. And by then I'd migrated back and just preferred kind of laying people in, and just generally I may be scarred from years of not scoring goals. I thought, well, I'd take the focus, take the heat off myself, and just set people up instead.
Yeah. So take the finishing out of the equation. Were you any good?
I don't know how you assess being any good these days, but I was I definitely had a sort of purple patch around kind of maybe 10 to maybe 9 to 11, something around there, where you're just in that moment where you're kind of loving the game. You're just sort of growing up enough to get strong enough to do everything, and playing with some good friends and stuff like that. And I think just before the age it started to get a bit serious, and you had to choose which sport and all that sort of stuff. So I'll call myself an okay player, and we'll leave it at that.
Did you play hockey?
I did, yeah. No, actually, when I say I had to choose sports, I actually ended up choosing hockey as my main sport, which I don't think was an easy decision from memory. I was playing tennis a lot as well at that time, and cricket, and it was sort of, there was just not enough time in the calendar by the sort of time I was getting a bit older. So I went for the one that I think I was probably best at hockey, so I chose it. I'm not sure I probably edged hockey in terms of enjoyment as well, but it was very close with football and tennis as well. But there just comes a point where you have to decide.
So what sort of standard would you have been playing hockey at the peak then?
Well, I played professional hockey when I was a lot older, so 22 in Switzerland.
In Switzerland?
And,
You gotta tell me that story.
Well, I actually got a friend of mine we'd just finished university, and he'd found this opportunity to go abroad and play hockey, and be paid for the privilege. And they were looking for a second player, so he kind of knew that I spoke a bit of French, and was at a fairly loose end after 4 years at uni. So it all worked out really nicely, and it was definitely one of the most enjoyable things I've done. Not only from a sporting perspective, but also from a life perspective, just being able to go and experience a new country and meet a load of people who I'm still in touch with, and just take a lot from it.
So you came back just when that came to an end?
I did, yeah. I think I had the option to stay on, but I sort of hockey's not a really massive sport, and in order to make it, so to speak, you've got to be absolutely top drawer. So I think the opportunity for me to make a living out of it was fairly small. So I came back to the UK and decided to get my feet under the table with an office job.
Switzerland's pretty special, though.
It is a beautiful place.
Really
I'd love to go and live there again.
So, in terms of football, Rob, how did you first get into the game as a supporter?
I remember my very first game going to see was Arsenal Southampton at Highbury, and it was Dennis Bergkamp's first goal in English football. He'd been on, I think, quite a drought up till then, so it was quite a special moment. I remember not being able to see anything because I was just too small, and everyone would stand up as people do when the ball even gets within crosses the halfway line. But that was an amazing memory. It must have been about 97, 96, maybe, something like that. And it was, just about the time I was getting into proper fandom, collecting the albums. Funnily enough, Arsenal weren't actually my club. I just got into Man United religiously through gigs in Cantonara, as I'm sure a lot of people of that era did. But that was, as well as sort of going to games, just being able to watch those games, big European nights on the TV, and it was magical. And I definitely think that was what really sparked the fire for what's become my career now.
So have you retained that love for United into adulthood?
Oh, I don't know. It's. I mean, obviously they'll always be the club of my heart. It's just I'd say some of the magic sadly disappears from when you start to realise how clubs are owned and how people run clubs and what their motives are, and all the ugly stuff that you don't know as a kid. All you see is the 22 people on the pitch and the action, and you don't really notice, the off-field stuff or the cynical stuff on the pitch. It sort of just goes over your head. And so it's a different thing being a fan now, but you still always, it's always in there, and you always want them to do well, no matter how it's going.
So how long have you been a non-league fan, observer, participant?
Probably the last 2 to 3 years now. So I moved to Woking in about 2017, I think it was. And not long after I actually changed from the career that I was doing into sports journalism, which then, funnily enough, happened for me that I was living in the same town as quite a big non-league team, which are Woking, obviously. And the opportunity came around, very strangely as it happened in the end, but the opportunity came around to cover them, and really that has been my route into non-league, I suppose, and I've absolutely loved it. I mean, it's been a good few years now, but there's a lot to enjoy about non-league that you perhaps don't get from, in fact, being a fan higher up. And obviously all the privileged access you get to games, particularly obviously during the pandemic, has been wonderful. And having the chance to be around a club where everyone is a lot more open, a lot more accessible, has made me want to follow non-league a lot more, and it's led me to sort of follow all sorts of things around non-league, which are exciting for anyone who's a lover of that tier of football.
I imagine the discovery element's still quite fresh for you a few years in.
It is. I think from going to games a lot, you just learn an awful lot about kind of how the local community is, and every club is so unique. Every club has the same dynamics, but they are all so different. They've all got very different histories which take them up to these days. I mean, you don't need to look at teams in Woking's league for how clubs have either reached there through coming up through all the leagues or coming down through all the leagues, or some might have kind of had financial strife or terrible ownership and all this sort of stuff. But in the end, it comes down to most times a sort of a core group of really passionate supporters who just want their team to do well, and that's one of the things I love about it the most, I think.
So my bread and butter nowadays is non-league. I go home and away with a Step 5 club where I'm on the committee, do the podcast, do the programme. But my first 2 non-league matches, the first one was a Poole Town game, which doesn't count because it was at Dean Court. And the second one was Woking versus Forest Green Rovers in
there you go.
2004, I think. So Woking's always had a bit of a sort of a strange place in my heart. Certainly not one of, love, but it's always going to be the first time I actually took myself into a non-league ground.
Yeah.
And felt what non-league was all about. And it was those same things that kind of came across to me, and they just amplify over the years, and you get really used to that environment. And I'm sure some people don't fall for it, but I know I certainly did.
Yeah.
Is that for you? Is that translated into being a Woking supporter, would you say?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because obviously I cover the club very closely, and there's actually very, very few. There's only 2 written media journalists who properly cover the club. It's me and one other guy. And there's a few others, obviously BBC Surrey and kind of, all the other types of people you might expect. But I think what that means is that obviously all of us try to maintain a degree of impartiality, but when you're in the press box, you can't, there is partiality. I mean, one of the co-commentators for BBC Surrey is a director on the board, for example, and clearly that gives him a knowledge of the club that means he's an excellent co-commentator. But equally, he's going to want his team to win, and that sort of comes across in some of the commentary. But for me, it's by virtue of being so close to the club, you do want them to win. You want them to do well. By doing well, that sort of gives you, more exciting matches and stories to cover and things like that. So, yeah, I'd say I'm I've become a fan, but in the coverage that I write, I have to try and still be impartial and reflect the facts as opposed to having too much of a Woking slant.
How did you get the gig with the local newspaper?
I was doing a kind of internship, I was basically covering Woking and a few other clubs for another paper. When I was finishing there, the editor said, I kind of asked the editor, I said, is there anything I could carry on doing here or elsewhere? And she said, I know of a job that's going at the Woking News and Mail, which is the paper I now work for. Yeah, look it up and see how you go. And I got home, looked it up, saw the advert. True enough, it was on Twitter. And yeah, just snowballed really. I mean, I messaged the guy, the editor the MD rather, who'd come back within a day or two. We met at Cafe Rouge in Woking and hit it off, and that was it really.
What does a typical Woking match day look like to you from the moment you kind of get in the car, get on the train?
Yeah, very different at the moment, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, taking away the obviously a big thronging ground is a massively exciting experience. I think when it's a big fixture, for example, last year there was the derby with Aldershot very early on, which I think was probably the first game I think I'd covered at Woking's ground, which was obviously quite special. There's the biggest crowd of the season, quite a baying sort of opposition support. Nice balmy summer's evening, August evening. That was really special. I think, yeah, obviously nowadays it's been quite a privilege being able to go into the grounds when there's no one else there and being able to see the action and feel like you can communicate it back to others through your writing, through Twitter and whatnot is a nice thing to be able to do. But that period has been rather strange. I mean, if I think back to some of the actual sort of normal games, then yeah, I actually tend to cycle to the ground, which is quite nice. I'm within reach, unless it's absolutely tipping it down. And yeah, I mean, I tend to get there kind of half an hour before. So I actually quite like being able to watch the teams warm up. That's in some ways one of the things I enjoy the most, just because you can stand right on the touchline, you can kind of hear what they're all chatting about. You can see what exercises they're doing to get ready. You can work out maybe who's on the bench and who isn't. Obviously, you might have had the team sheet by that point. But yeah, and then it's sort of just a short walk up to what is a very, I don't think the club will mind me saying, primitive press box with a tin roof and very cold on a winter's evening if it's a Tuesday night game. But Yeah, usually it's a case of if it's a weekend game, I've got a bit more time to think about the report, given our paper's deadlines. But Tuesday nights are probably the more manic ones because that's a live report with the paper due to go to print the same night. So sometimes a bit stressful if there's late goals and late drama.
The curse of the football journalist.
Yeah, that's right.
How do the players interact with you as someone who, they're probably aware has got a level of affection for the club, but ultimately is there to do a job, but a very specific job focused just on that one club? Have they kind of got the measure of who you are and what your role is there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm still relatively new. I mean, so if I think of some of the other guys who've been around the club in a media capacity, they've certainly been there a lot longer than I am, and they've made. There's a lot of people at that club who've been there years and years and years. I think of someone like Gary Richardson, who's the old BBC commentator who used to be, I think, a director on the board, and he sort of comes in and sits in the director's seats and chats to everyone who he knows, and it's kind of that relationship all around, really. So I'm still, I obviously know a lot of the guys quite well by now, and yeah, I think generally they understand the job you're trying to do. I think the manager sets the tone a lot of the time. He's very open and willing to give up his time. And I think that probably filters down to the players as well. I think it's important. He's a very community-centric manager, so he doesn't just think about the team and getting his team to win matches, although that's obviously front and centre. It is also about, helping people do their jobs and being a bit philanthropic. So he does a lot of work for hospices and charities and all the rest of it. And, that sort of reach in the end works to everyone's favour because the club is seen in more favourable light, and then all that kind of works both ways. So yeah, it's a good relationship between sort of all the involved parties, I think, around the club. And I think particularly during the pandemic, I think it's been important to have that because I think people are looking out for each other a bit more, working with each other a bit more, trying to sort of look out for each other's mutual success and stuff. So that's been a really nice part of it.
You also have a scouting role.
I do, yeah.
Somewhere else, which is fascinating to me for reasons that I can't really explain.
I scout lower down the non-league pyramid. So for connoisseurs of non-league, it's a Step 4 club called Ashford Town who play in the Isthmian League South Central Division. I think that's right, and that's just as enjoyable, really. I mean, I think because I changed career into sort of journalism and writing, and I suppose football as a whole. I always wanted to. I did it with the premise of, right, I'm going to do what I want to do. Otherwise, there's no point to me having done this. So that was one of the things I've always really enjoyed doing, is sort of watching games through a different sort of lens. I.e., can I work out what this team are doing? Can I work out what the players are doing? Can I use that to the benefit of a team? And obviously, it's helped being a journalist because you're just at a lot of games. Anyway, albeit, I've watched a lot of games on TV and, Football Manager and all the rest of it. But, it's been maybe slightly different to what I expected. You've got to be so concentrated throughout the game because I think there's so many different things going on at any one point. And depending on what the manager wants to know for the team that you're watching, it's difficult for only one pair of eyes to capture it. So it's been really enjoyable, and I'm hoping to sort of carry on and keep learning. But it's definitely one of those things where you're quite tired after an hour and a half's work.
Is it fair to say the challenging bit is what players are doing off the ball?
Yeah, it is. I think sometimes video saves you. So if you're sort of watching it through your phone because it's a set piece or maybe a particular phase in play, then you might be able to look back over it. But yeah, as you say, it's probably quite obvious to watch where the ball is in a football match, but actually a lot of the clues you can get are from the off the ball stuff. And as soon as a team loses the ball, right, what's their shape? Has it changed from what it was on the ball? Have the players' positions changed? And as the game goes on, when you start to see that the same thing happening 5, 6, 7, 8 times, you start to realise, right, I've got my pattern now, and I can confidently say to the manager that this is probably what they're going to do when we play them. And that's a nice sort of eureka moment when you've got that nugget and you can take something away that will help the team hopefully get more points.
When you go out and do that opposition analysis and you take in all of that information, you make those judgments on what's happening. What's the actual sort of raw material form of what goes back? Is that a phone call? Do you write an email? How does that get back to the gaffer?
It's a bit of a mix. So he'd send me what he wants to know in sort of bullet form, and then I would, well, first and foremost, try and answer all those questions, and then I might do little additional bits. So you might ask to say, can you record all of their defensive set pieces? Which means you need to free up a lot of space on your phone, or your memory, your own memory. And then, usually just the raw video material can be sent back, or, a bit of a kind of summarized responses really to his questions. And a lot of the time he just wants that as simple as possible, because I think a lot of the time it will go into, non-league teams don't have a lot of time to do prep. So he might email it to a few players, or he might just do it pre-match. Because of the pandemic, I haven't been in a lot of those meetings and things like that, but that is generally what I think happens. So say when it's pre-match, it just needs to be sound bites, quick, this, that and the other, not kind of a long thing that will make people zone out and forget by the time the match has got started.
How often have you seen Ashford Town play?
Probably 2 or 3 times, so not that often. Funnily enough, well, I'd only started the role this season really, so there's not a lot of it's not been a normal season by any stretch, particularly as the season's just been, it was paused in November, and unlike some of the other leagues, it hasn't got started again yet, and so it's a difficult one, and but from my perspective, it does help to watch my own team, chiefly because I can then work out what our threats are and how they could marry up against the opposition. Obviously, if I'm just watching the opposition, then I don't have any idea of how we could hurt them. I've just got an idea of where they're weak. But if they've got a slow right back, but our left wing is slow as well, for example, that's sort of, there's not much I can do there. But if I know where we're really strong, I know where we could sort of really outweigh some of their weaknesses.
It always strikes me as a difficult balance, because you've got to be the opposition scout, which means that part of your job is to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
it is.
It's a difficult thing, because you do need to see your own team in order to do that. But then you have Woking on top as well. So it's your Saturday calendar must be bedlam.
Yeah. There's not a lot of time. The midweek games, obviously, with this season being very condensed as well, there's a lot of Saturday, Tuesday, and then there's a few local teams around here in Ashford's league, but it's not often that a fixture will totally correspond. And also the manager he's going out to watch games all the time. He's got his own staff who kind of do the same thing. So what I can do is sort of top up what he's seen or what he might know, and then sort of you put that all together, and it's hopefully a good, they should have a good view on who they're playing by the time the match comes down.
How did you land at that club in particular?
I knew the manager through my journalism work.
Okay.
Luke Tufts. So he's a very talented guy. He's very, very switched on tactically. Perhaps unlike many managers, even I've come across further up the leagues. He's just very sharp. Can sort of instantly pinpoint where things are going wrong. And that always came through when I talked to him on the phone before, when I was covering his whole club. And it was it's someone I'd sort of clicked with and wanted to work for, because I think it's exciting being able to see things that he sees, because it's a great learning opportunity for me. I think he's doing his A license course at the moment, so that he's a good person for me to listen to and to be alongside, because I will learn things at the same time, and hopefully I might tell him the odd thing he doesn't know as well.
You've mentioned learning there, and you've also hinted a couple of times at a career change. You've got a pretty interesting CV, and the way you've navigated those changes in your career was a bit more methodical than a lot of people might expect. Why don't you tell us a bit about that process of moving into, as you say, football more generally?
Yeah, it'd been on the cards for a long time, I think, my career change. So I'd nearly got into football journalism when I first graduated, which was almost about the exact same time as the financial crash, first one. And I think I was just dissuaded from doing so because of the just pure scarcity of jobs, and maybe the sort of wrong mindset of, I've got to follow a proper career, or I've done this degree in languages, so that leads me towards more of a corporate career, etc., etc. So I probably went into my career slightly on the wrong foot, but I don't regret any of it. But it's just an interesting case, not just for me, but I think a whole host of people do the same thing. They end up in careers where if you told them that was what they were going to be doing, they might not have believed you, or they might have thought kind of, oh, that's a shame. Or, not, as I say, not that I regret any of it, because it gave me some great opportunities, and I met some terrific people. I particularly enjoyed kind of the work I was able to do abroad. I worked in New York for 6 months. I was in Switzerland again an awful lot with my last company, which was Hive Learning, and the chairman was Sir Clive Woodward. So and I was sat in meetings with him a lot, and one of the only, well, apart from the Trevor Bayliss, the cricket coach, I think one of the only English World Cup winning coaches we can boast. So really terrific experiences, and but there was a point, it came to a point where I was just kind of, I think when you reach a sort of maybe a decade, a bit less, or around there, you start to think what your career is really about, and your heart's telling you what you really want to do, but your head is saying, goodness me, that's an awful jump, and can I make it work? But in the end, I think the rewards or the risk outweighed the potential failure. So I think I just, as you say, I took probably a slightly more methodical approach, in the sense of I wanted to study. If I was going to move, I wanted to study first, so that I was kind of, I could, genuinely say I knew a bit about the subject, and I knew what I was talking about, and I've proven I can do it, and I've proven I can apply myself, and then mix it with a bit of experience. So I studied and worked for probably 6 months after I'd quit my job, just getting a grip for what I was doing. The thing with a career change I found is that you never really, there's no set path for doing it. No one can really say these are the right steps and this is how long you need to take and this is what you need to do. It's really just about a bit of feel and a bit of following your gut, and sort of seizing on the luck and the chances that present themselves, and using your network and contacts that you've built up over your life. And I think all of that sort of came together in the end, and I was able to, very fortunately find myself now working in jobs that I really like, which maybe I hadn't always been able to say, but it definitely makes a difference to I think the quality of work and your well-being, being able to do something you really love. You sort of put a bit more into it, and it doesn't feel like work, and all those sort of things that I'm sure people that do jobs they love can also bear witness to.
You speak 3 languages?
Yes.
That's pretty impressive. That must have helped you before and after the career change, I guess.
Yeah, it did. I definitely, it's when you go, I notice it when you go abroad a lot more, that people are always surprised that an English or British person can speak languages, which is a bit depressing, because it's such a big part of learning about other countries and other cultures, and when you can't do it, it just closes off so much of the world. So I always enjoyed languages, always wanted to do it, and it had the added benefit of being able to go and explore other countries, be able to get by, and also be a bit of a distinguisher on my CV. Really, I think for many jobs they ask for those things, but from my experience, the jobs that I've worked in, the people that spoke languages were the Portuguese person that was fluent in English, but they were native Portuguese. It wasn't an English person who spoke Portuguese, or it wasn't an English person that spoke French. It was a French person that had come to England. So there are very few people I came across that were like that, and I fear it's getting fewer and fewer. But I hope that we can still teach it and still learn it, because I found it always of huge value.
Do you write professionally exclusively in English?
Yes, yeah. I do. Yeah,
probably for the best.
Well, yeah, I do. I also work for Marca,
yeah.
the Spanish daily, which is not writing in Spanish, but it is translating from Spanish to English.
Okay.
But it's slightly easier when you're converting into your own language rather than trying to write in another one.
Is there a particular sports journalism job that you would describe as having been your big break after the change of careers?
It's hard to say. That I mean, definitely the Woking News and Mail is probably my big break, if I could call it that, only because it was the one where I suddenly felt like I was a bona fide journalist, sports journalist. You know, I'd done some roles beforehand, but they'd been quite ad hoc. It wasn't like this isn't a permanent job, but it's more of a permanent job in the sense of it's quite a chunky role, and it takes up a lot of my week. Whereas the other ones had been, I'd covered some games for Crystal Palace, for example, the academy matches, but it wasn't a regular thing. It was just kind of once or twice every now and again. Whilst that was fantastic for learning and making connections and getting into the world, that was probably my I had a big break. That was it. But maybe there's more big breaks to come. I don't know when I get a job with Barcelona. That's.
Which other titles are on the list at the moment? Because you work for the News and Mail, but you have other roles as a freelance sports journalist. Mundial, yeah. Did I see Mundial on the list somewhere?
I've written for Mundial before, yeah. I love the guys there. They're so talented. It was fascinating. I worked there for a very short time, just getting some experience. But yeah, very, very good stories, well told, passionate. Everything you'd want a football magazine or brand to be. Yeah, I do quite a lot of writing for Football Index as well, which is the football stock market, as people call it, or they call it themselves, which is really good fun. I've loved their concept ever since they started. They're a lot bigger now, with huge Twitter communities and whatnot. But in the early days when I sort of first knew about them, it was, still is a really new concept, and a lot of people are sort of mimicking what they've done, but they were the first movers, and it's been great to be associated with them and be able to kind of write about things that are really interesting. And actually the price points on Football Index are such a new way of thinking about value in football, and like which players have the biggest sort of currency, so to speak. And I also, they've recently started a new podcast series, which I've contributed to. So they're quite an exciting company. I think I like these companies that sort of do different things within sport, within football. You get new perspectives, you get a way of thinking about the game that differs so widely across different, publishers and tones of voice and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, those are probably some of the biggest ones I've worked for. I mean, they all have their own merits and their own ways of talking. And as a writer and journalist, it was very, very difficult, I think, from memory to chop and change between those two. So if you're doing a feature for Mundial versus a sort of piece for a fairly tabloidy paper like the News and Mail is, it's a real sea change in your mind every week that you're shifting between them, but it's fun.
Have you focused your beat as a result of getting work and also not wanting to chop and change between different clients?
Possibly. I think I'd try to deliberately have a sort of wide variety of topics that I write about. I wouldn't say I have gravitated towards certain things, and sometimes I think as I learned in my previous career, you do become a sort of subject matter expert for particular things, because that's just what you're writing about, and that's therefore what you know. On the flip side, you can always branch out to different areas, and by having a variety of things that you've done, that does sort of evidence your ability to cover things in different ways, or to understand the dynamics of a club or a particular football country and all this sort of thing. So I think it's been probably a purposeful decision to keep a broad variety of things on the go, and in a way that's part of the fun, sort of seeing where it takes you in 5-10 years.
What I'd like to ask you to finish off, Rob, is what does the next year look like? But none of us know. I assume it's the same for you.
Yeah, no, I'd love to know. I mean, I think there's been a lot of ups and downs this year, not just for me, but in all of sports journalism. I think been on Twitter some days, and I've just been seeing a raft of writers or people that I follow kind of saying, it's my last day at X, it's my last day at Y, layoffs, uncertainty, difficulty to keep going in certain roles, and that's certainly affected me as well in certain cases. If not being able to do work anymore, it's certainly reduced the volume of work that I've been able to do for some of the companies or publishers I work for. So I'd love to know what it holds. I mean, I think there's good signs, obviously, going forward. We're probably quite lucky in the sense that football has carried on. I mean, if you're a travel writer or if you're a photographer or whatever, then you haven't been so lucky. But the fact that sport is still on means we're all still able to do this stuff, which is, we have to sort of think we're very fortunate. And even if it's a bit of a fallow period, I said to someone the other day, if we can sort of cope through all of this stuff, then we can sort of cope through anything, really. So I'm hopeful that the next year is about continuing to learn, continuing to sort of do the things that I like doing, and I'm hoping that we can get promoted. That would be the best. That would be the best thing. We were sitting in the playoffs. I need to check the table. I think we might still be. So I say we. Sorry, I shouldn't say we, should I? Meant to be a journalist. They. But no, I'd love to. That's probably the way I'd love to see out the season, with a playoff or a promotion. That'd be really a fun thing to cover.
Well, I wish you the best. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us, Rob.
Cheers, Chris. Pleasure likewise too.
Where can we find you?
I'm on Twitter a lot of the time, so I think my username is Rob_Hemingway. That's with one M, often misspelt.
That's the Rob Hub. If you've enjoyed meeting Rob, there's plenty more where that came from. Don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Humans of Non-League is a Sphinx Football production. Thank you for listening.